Hidden deep within the woods and hollows of Arkansas lie stories too chilling to forget. First-hand accounts of towering figures, haunting howls and primal fear. These dramatized encounters, based entirely on real witness reports, take you into the heart of each moment, when the ordinary turned extraordinary. What follows are 10 eerie recollections of those who came far too close to something unknown and walked away changed. Encounter 1, submitted by witness on Friday, May 12, 2017. A vivid memory from 1976 recalls a startling daytime encounter with a white Bigfoot during a motorcycle ride inside Camp Joseph T. Robinson. In the fall of 1976, the rolling woods of Camp Joseph T. Robinson in Pulaski County, Arkansas, held more than just the rustle of leaves and the hum of motorcycles. What began as a typical afternoon of teenage fun would evolve into an unforgettable, close-range encounter with a creature not of myth, but of stark, terrifying reality. The witness, a high school senior at the time, was part of a tight-knit group of friends. Lauren P., Jerry W., Tommy B., Jim O., and himself. They often spent their weekends tuning up their motorcycles and tearing through the trails inside the military base, a freedom riders once enjoyed before restrictions were tightened. That September day was warm and clear, the kind of perfect weather that begged for adventure. The group had found a natural obstacle in the terrain, a ditch about 6 feet deep and 7 feet wide, and had taken to jumping it for thrills. The witness rode a yellow Suzuki 185, complete with a Stinger exhaust that popped and cracked through the woods. After nearly wiping out on a landing, he decided to back off.
While the others continued their antics at the ditch, I peeled off down a dirt trail that ran east, following a slow, cautious pace. I was alone, unfamiliar with the path, but content to explore.
Roughly 20 minutes into the ride, movement caught his eye to the south, something white gliding between the trees. At first he thought it was another rider, perhaps on a white motorcycle, heading perpendicular to his own path. Concerned about a potential collision, he eased off the throttle and stopped to wait.
But as the figure drew closer and began to emerge from the trees, I realized it wasn't a motorcycle or a rider. It walked upright, towering at what I estimated to be 8 to 9 feet tall. The creature stopped directly on the trail, no more than 25 yards away. There were no trees or brush between us, only open space and raw fear.
The creature was lanky, with an unsettling gait. Its stride was enormous, perhaps 6 feet per step, and its arms hung low with long hands that reached nearly to its knees. The body was covered in dirty white short hair, not fur, and it wore no clothing. Its musculature was lean but powerful, as if honed by a life of roaming through dense terrain.
Helmeted and frozen, I studied its face. It was unmistakably not human. The head was more triangular than round, and its eyes, small and intense, locked directly onto me with a predator's focus. The nostrils were tight slits spaced about 2 inches apart, and the mouth resembled that of a human, only slightly wider. There was no smell, likely thanks to the helmet, but the presence was undeniable.
For several seconds, what felt like an eternity, they stared at one another. Then the creature made a face, its upper lip curled back in a sneer, revealing sharp, meat-tearing teeth. The eyes squinted in clear displeasure, as if silently warning him. The message was clear: you don't belong here.
Terrified and convinced an attack was imminent, I prepared to flee. But the creature broke the tension first. It turned and walked away, continuing its journey south along the trail with the same unnaturally long strides. Shaken, I feared it might circle back like an injured animal and reappear suddenly from the brush. Wasting no time, I turned the bike around and sped off, heart pounding, throttle wide open.
He rode with professional-level focus, not daring to look back. It had taken him 20 minutes to get to that spot. He was back at the jumping ditch in 10. Only Jim O was there when he returned, sitting on the tailgate of the truck. The others were still in the woods. Breathless and barely able to speak, he shouted,
"Jim! There's something in the woods! We've got to warn the guys!"
What happened next stopped him cold. Jim looked up calm and said,
"Is it real tall and white?" Stunned, I blurted, "Yes, why in the hell didn't you tell me?"
Jim confessed he had seen the creature before, while squirrel hunting with his nephew Pete at Camp Robinson, but had kept it quiet for fear of being mocked. That moment cemented the witness's conviction. He hadn't imagined it. Someone else had seen it too. Over the years, the witness continued to bow hunt in the same area, And though he never saw it again in quite the same way, he always felt it. The heavy silence in the woods, the sensation of being watched, the way the hairs on his neck would rise. He often stayed in the truck until daylight, unwilling to venture into the forest's shadows alone. And while many might scoff at his story, he's shared it countless times, with friends, family, and strangers alike. Because he didn't just believe he saw something out there by the all-American drop zone, he knew it saw him too. Encounter 2, submitted by witness on Wednesday, April 16, 2003. An early morning drive in 1981 led to a brief but unforgettable sighting of a reddish-brown Sasquatch digging near a bridge outside Siloam Springs. In the quiet early hours of an October morning in 1981, a 17-year-old made his usual weekend commute from Siloam Springs to Fayetteville, Arkansas. The sleepy town streets were still cloaked in darkness as he pulled onto the old Highway 68, his destination 28 miles away. He'd made this drive countless times, navigating the familiar bends and rises through the hills of Benton County. But what he encountered on that particular morning would sear itself into his memory forever. The time was around 5:30 a.m. The sky was just beginning to shift from black to the faint grey of pre-dawn, and the cool, dry air hung still over the road. As his Volkswagen Bug hummed down the highway, its weak headlights struggled to cut through the dim light. The low hum of the engine and the occasional chirp of crickets were the only sounds accompanying his solitary journey. As he approached the Fairmount Bridge just outside of Siloam Springs, something off to the side of the road caught his eye. At first glance, it appeared to be a coyote, or maybe a large dog, scratching at the ground with its hind legs near the bridge's embankment. The figure was hunched and moving with an odd rhythm, kicking at the dirt. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, his curiosity rising.
But as I drew closer, the shape became clearer. This was no dog. I was now only a few dozen feet away, and the creature came into better view. What I saw was a tall, upright figure covered in reddish-brown hair. Its back was toward me at first, its arms moving deliberately as it dug in the dirt with a motion that felt startlingly familiar. Not animalistic, but almost primate-like.
As his headlights washed over it, the creature paused, lifting its head. That's when he saw the face. The face was less hairy than the rest of its body, with lighter-toned skin around the eyes, cheeks, and mouth. It wasn't a mask or a costume. It was alive, with features unmistakably different from a human's, but eerily close enough to trigger a deep, unsettling fear.
The creature looked straight at me, seemingly startled by the sudden presence of the car. It didn't move at first, just stared. Then, in an instant, it sprang up and bolted across the road behind me. Watching it move was surreal. Its strides were long and smooth, more like a person running than an animal bounding. It moved quickly, but not wildly.
The creature, which he estimated to be close to 7 feet tall, appeared surprisingly slender for its height. Not the bulky beast one might imagine, but lean and agile. The teen instinctively glanced into his rearview mirror as it dashed across the highway. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, disappearing into the brush and trees that surrounded the road.
The entire encounter lasted mere seconds, but it was enough. There were no glowing red eyes, no dramatic growls, just the strange primal behavior and a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. A Sasquatch. There was no other explanation that made sense.
When he arrived at work in Fayetteville, he didn't tell anyone. Not then. Who would believe him? But over the years, he would never forget the image of that reddish-brown figure crouching by the bridge, digging like a primate and sprinting away like a man. The strange thing was, there had always been local stories, tales whispered among residents of something unusual in the hills. He had always dismissed them, until that day. Encounter 3, submitted by witness Jackie Castillo on Monday, June 4th, 2001. In late November 2000, a lakeside walk revealed disturbing signs of a predator in Benton County, Arkansas, marked not by sound or sight, but by the prints left behind. It was a crisp morning in late November 2000, the kind where the sun glints off the water and the air carries a gentle chill, just cool enough for sweatshirts, not coats. Jackie Castillo and her 37-year-old son decided to take a walk along the receding shoreline of Beaver Lake, located just north of Hickory Creek Marina and south of the White River in Benton County, Arkansas. They weren't just out for a stroll, they were scanning the packed sandy ground for arrowheads, their dog darting ahead excitedly, nose low to the earth. The lake was unusually low due to the dry weather, exposing more shoreline than usual, an open stretch of earth rarely touched by humans. The dog was the first to notice something strange. It veered off course, tail high, ears alert, following a large set of raccoon tracks. The tracks were fresh and well-defined in the sand, leading away from the water toward a patch of earth that seemed disturbed. Curious, Jackie and her son followed.
What we found stopped us in our tracks. Roughly 20 yards from the waterline, the sandy ground showed signs of a scuffle. Something had clearly occurred there. The raccoon tracks continued into the area of disturbance and then eerily vanished. In their place were two sets of human-like footprints, not boot prints, not shoes. Bare, broad, deeply imprinted prints, like someone had walked barefoot through the cold, wet sand.
But these weren't ordinary tracks. The first set was enormous, approximately 16 to 17 inches long and 5 to 6 inches wide at the ball of the foot. The second, smaller set ran alongside them, measuring around 11 inches in length and about 4 to 5 inches across.
They weren't prints from kids playing at the lake or barefoot hikers. They were deep, pressed several inches into the compacted soil, much deeper than the faint impressions my son and I left behind, despite weighing 130 and 180 pounds respectively.
Even more disturbing was the layout. The larger tracks walked in, seemingly from the woodline, met the raccoon trail where the earth was disturbed, and then turned back toward the woods. The raccoon tracks stopped there, abruptly, as if the animal had been caught.
We had no camera, no tape measure, just our eyes and instincts. The prints were flat with no arch, similar to how ape tracks appear. We attempted to follow them, tracing the two sets of footprints back toward the trees, but the terrain quickly changed. The forest floor was firmer, covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves, and soon the trail disappeared.
Then the dog began to act strangely. At the sight of the disturbance, the dog began whining, circling the area nervously. It defecated and urinated on the spot, something it never did before, and then tried frantically to cover the area with dirt and sand. It was as if the dog recognized the site as a place of violence, danger, even death. Its instincts were telling it something its humans couldn't yet grasp.
We left the area, shaken. We couldn't explain what we had seen. Two large, barefoot beings, one nearly twice the size of the other, apparently stalking and intercepting a raccoon. One set of prints was significantly heavier, deeper. The other, still large for a human, was lighter, but followed closely. Could it have been a mother and adolescent, a pair of hunters? The implications were chilling.
Later, Jackie remembered stories she had heard growing up. Tales from Missouri farmers about sheep disappearing in the 40s and 50s and neighbors near the Arkansas lake who had reported feeling watched at night. Odd reports at the time, easily brushed off. But now those old legends didn't feel so distant. They felt rooted in something far more real, something still walking the edges of those woods. Encounter 4, submitted by witness on Tuesday, October 12, 2004. In July 1994, a nighttime drive near Eureka Springs turned eerie when passengers spotted a tall, hair-covered figure reacting to their headlights on a mountain road. The Ozark Mountains in northern Arkansas are a place of beauty and mystery, a patchwork of forested hills and winding roads that feel untouched by time. In the summer of 1994, a group of performers returning to an opera festival in the woods west of Eureka Springs found themselves driving through one such stretch. It was just after midnight, the road dark, the sky moonless, and the hum of conversation in the car barely masking the feeling that they were miles from anywhere. They had spent the evening across the state line in Missouri, performing at a run-out show, and were now making their way back to the secluded festival grounds, nestled deep in the forest. Highway 62, the road they were on, curled through the mountainous terrain like a serpent, bordered by nothing but dense trees and occasional glimpses of Beaver Lake. The car's headlights cut a narrow path through the night until something stepped into it. Off to the right side of the road, standing on a slight slope, was a figure. It was tall, very tall, and entirely covered in what appeared to be brownish hair. As the headlights illuminated it, the figure turned away, raising its arms to shield its face from the sudden brightness. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop in the car. No one said a word. They all saw the same thing, but their minds scrambled for an explanation. Was it a person? But who would be out there in the middle of nowhere, unclothed and standing on a hill at this hour? And if it were a person, why didn't it look like one? The figure had no clothes, no gear, no flashlight. It was lean, not bulky like a bear, but tall and upright like a human. And it clearly reacted to the car's lights like any sentient being would. But the hands, the arms, the posture, not human. The driver didn't slow down, and no one suggested turning back. They all felt it, an unspoken fear prickling at their skin. As they continued down the road, silence filled the vehicle. Eventually, one of them asked, "Did you guys just see that?" They had. In the days and weeks that followed, the witness, the one who would later submit this report, found himself revisiting the moment again and again. He had seen a bear in these mountains before, and this was not a bear. Bears don't stand still and upright like that, don't have long gangly arms or human-like hands that cover their faces. And the more he thought about it, the more the image haunted him, the way the creature turned from the light, the silence, the height, the surreal realization that it was not a man and not an animal either. At least not one known to science. He remembered another experience from his childhood back in 1975 when he was just 7. A fleeting glimpse, something possible then, perhaps even easily dismissed. But this time, nearly 20 years later, it was witnessed by 4 people. The impression it left was permanent. Afterward, the witness dove into everything he could find about Bigfoot. He'd always been curious, but now he was invested, reading reports, watching documentaries, tracing patterns. He came across other reports from the Beaver Lake area, stories that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. The strange thing wasn't that he'd seen something unexplainable that night in July. It was that so many others had too. Encounter 5. Submitted by witness. On Monday, June 8, 2009. While driving his rig late one night in November 1996, a trucker saw what he thought was a tree trunk until it moved, revealing a tall, red-eyed creature near the Sulphur River. It was a cold November night in 1996, and Highway 71 in Miller County, Arkansas, was as quiet and deserted as it had ever been. The only sound was the steady roar of an 18-wheeler pushing through the darkness. The driver, a long-haul trucker, had traveled this stretch countless times, especially the swampy lowlands just south of Fouke, near the Sulphur River. The road elevated slightly through this region, allowing it to cross the wet, tangled marshland below. It was just after 1 a.m. The sky was dark, no moonlight to speak of, and thick clouds hung overhead, making it almost pitch black beyond the reach of the truck's headlights. As he neared a familiar bend near the river crossing, something odd caught his eye on the right side of the road. In the dim wash of his headlights, he spotted what he assumed was a tree trunk, something old and dead, stripped of branches, standing straight up near the water's edge. And then it blinked. 2 red eyes gleamed from the trunk, reflecting the headlights. The driver assumed it must be an owl perched high in the tree. But something felt wrong. The eyes were too low to be in a tree, and too large to belong to any bird. He squinted through the windshield, straining to make out the shape. Then the impossible happened. The tree moved. It stepped forward, away from the edge of the embankment, and turned as if to melt into the surrounding swamp. There was no mistaking it now. This was no dead tree, and it definitely wasn't a bird. It was a living, towering creature, dark in color and humanoid in shape, standing at least 6 feet tall, maybe more. As it disappeared into the darkness, the trucker realized how close he had come to driving right past it without ever knowing. And then came the sound. A scream, loud enough to cut through the engine noise and the sealed cabin of the cab. A sound not quite human, not quite animal, but filled with rage or warning. It was a deep, chilling bellow that echoed through the swamp, reaching into his chest and rattling his nerves. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He kept his eyes on the road and pushed on, refusing to look in the mirrors. His gut told him whatever it wasn't something he wanted to see again. When he reached his next stop, he didn't share the story with anyone except close family. It was too bizarre, too unbelievable. Who would believe that a red-eyed creature had stood just off the highway like a sentinel of the swamp and screamed at a passing truck? But in the back of his mind he remembered where he was. Fouke, Arkansas. Home of the infamous Boggy Creek Monster, the same legend that had haunted locals and fueled campfire stories for generations. He hadn't believed any of it until now. Encounter 6. Submitted by witness on Wednesday, February 11th, 2004. A seasoned coon hunter's night in the flooded timber of Miller County took a terrifying turn in early 2000 when he came face to face with a massive creature that left even his dogs cowering. It was a clear, cold night in early 2000, January or February, when a lifelong coon hunter ventured into the Sulphur River bottoms near Fouke, Arkansas. The area was known among hunters as Thornton Wells, a flooded stretch of brackish timberland near Mercer Bayou, on the edge of the Miller County Wildlife Management Area. The hunter, a resident of northeast Texas near Texarkana, had come prepared. He'd hunted this terrain for years, often with friends, and had the credentials to prove it. Licensed in 3 states, multiple UKC night champions under his belt, and a deep understanding of the land and its sounds. That night, like many before, he was running Walker hounds, hardy, battle-proven dogs bred to tree and tear apart even the most aggressive raccoons or intruding coyotes. But on this night, those very same hounds would tremble behind him like frightened pups. He and his group had split up, each following the sound of their own dogs. The timber was flooded, 8 to 15 inches of cold swamp water spread across the forest floor. It was slow, wet work, but he made his way across to where his own dogs had treed. He shone his light up into the tree. There was the coon, standard catch. He leashed his dogs, satisfied, and began making his way back toward the others. Then something changed. He heard movement in the water behind him, heavy, deliberate steps splashing slowly through the flooded timber. He paused, assuming one of the other hunters had joined him. "That you?" he called out. No reply. Instead, what answered was a deep, throaty growl that seemed to bubble up from somewhere just beyond the reach of his light. And then came the smell, a putrid, choking stench that hit him like a slap. It was like the sour musk of a freshly killed wild hog left out in the heat, mixed with rot and something primal. And his dogs, his proud, aggressive Walker hounds, tucked their tails and whimpered, cowering behind his legs. It was at that moment he knew whatever was out there, it wasn't human. He turned to leave, adrenaline rushing, heart pounding in his ears. But the steps continued. Something was following him, and then he saw it. There, not far behind him, in the shallow water, stood a towering creature, covered in dark, coarse hair, easily 8 to 9 feet tall. His coon light caught its eyes, which reflected like a deer's in the beam. The creature hissed and let out a low, rumbling moan as it reached down and scooped up water, flinging it in his direction in a strangely deliberate gesture. Now his dogs sprang to life, snapping, growling, pulling at the leash, their terror transforming into panic-fueled aggression. He yanked them close, turned and ran. He didn't care about the cold water sloshing into his boots or the direction of the compass. He just moved. Trees blurred past. Every splash behind him echoed like thunder. He veered off course, nearly collapsed behind a massive cypress knee and paused to catch his breath. He listened. The creature was still behind him, farther now, maybe 100 yards or more, but still present. He could hear its steps. It let out a long moaning sound, like it was calling or warning him, or grieving. Eventually the sounds faded across the bayou. The creature didn't pursue. It stopped. He made it back to the truck. He didn't speak a word to the others, not that night, not for a long time, but he never went back to Thornton Wells. The only person he ever confided in was an old coon hunter from Doddridge, Arkansas. That man, long since passed, had said one thing in response. "If you're smart, you'll keep that to yourself. People will laugh, they always do." And for years he did. He kept it quiet until now, because no amount of ridicule could erase what he saw, or what followed him through that flooded forest, leaving 22-inch prints in the swamp and fear in the hearts of even the bravest dogs. Encounter 7, submitted by witness on Sunday, April 1st, 2001. In February 2001, a driver exploring back roads near Boggy Creek heard an unearthly howl echoing across the trees as night fell over Fouke, Arkansas. It was a quiet Saturday evening in February 2001 when a local resident took to the rural back roads west of Fouke, Arkansas. The town had long been known for strange happenings. Nestled near the famed Boggy Creek and surrounded by lowland woods and creek bottoms, it was home to a legend that refused to die: the Fouke Monster. The area had been recently hit by a major ice storm around Christmas. Trees were still broken, power lines sagging, and back roads were scattered with debris. The witness wasn't out for anything unusual, just a casual drive to check on the damage, breathe in the cold air, and enjoy a bit of solitude in the woods. The sun had already dipped low in the sky as he passed into the Jonesville area, 3 to 5 miles due west of Fouke. Gravel roads crunched under his tires. Light filtered weakly through the trees, the temperature settling around 48 to 50 degrees. A hush had settled over the landscape, that heavy, expectant quiet that sometimes precedes the unnatural. It was just before full darkness when he reached a dirt driveway in front of a hunting lease and decided to turn around. That's when it happened. The moment the car came to a stop, before he even began reversing, a sound pierced the silence, a howl, long, drawn out, and deeply unsettling. It didn't sound like a coyote, a dog, or even a wolf. It was something deeper, more guttural, filled with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the trees and straight into the chest. He froze. The howl didn't repeat. It didn't come from close by, but it didn't seem far either. It was loud enough to be clearly heard through the car windows, which were rolled up against the chill. The trees obscured any view of what might have made it. But he knew instantly he had heard something no ordinary animal could make. There was a strange intelligence to it, as if it had waited for him to stop the car, to listen, almost like it wanted to be heard. With nightfall now fully upon him, he turned the car around quickly and left the area, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't see anything. No shapes in the trees, no movement through the brush. But the howl was more than enough. Later he came across audio recordings of alleged Bigfoot vocalizations. Howls captured in other states, in remote areas like this one. And his blood ran cold. What he heard that night near Boggy Creek was the same sound. It was rare. It was real. And he had heard it with his own ears, just beyond the reach of the headlights, in the place where so many others over the decades had claimed something massive and unknown still roams. The locals talk about it still. Stories of strange happenings, eerie cries in the night, and even reports of dogs being hurt or vanishing. One tale even spoke of something tall and wild stepping onto a porch to snatch a dog right from the edge of civilization. The witness didn't see the creature that night, but he didn't need to. The howl was enough to confirm what he'd always suspected. Something ancient and unseen still haunts the lowland woods of Fouke, and it's not afraid to make its presence known when the night is just dark enough. Encounter 8, submitted by witness on Sunday, August 27th, 2000. Two boys hiking near East End, Arkansas found themselves face to face with something massive and unknown, an encounter that turned a quiet afternoon into a desperate sprint for safety. It was the fall of 1998, somewhere near the edge of the season, warm enough for short sleeves, but with that unmistakable crispness in the air that hinted at winter just around the corner. The woods behind a small neighborhood in East End, Arkansas, were quiet. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light across the forest floor as two teenage boys hiked through the familiar terrain. They had no agenda, no school, no parents, no pressure, just two friends out exploring, something they'd done countless times before. They walked the same trails they knew by heart, joking and kicking at fallen leaves, the kind of carefree wanderings only youth allows. But things changed quickly. One of the boys slipped on a patch of uneven ground, twisting his ankle badly enough that he couldn't go on. Wincing in pain, he waved his friend on, insisting he'd be fine, resting for a minute while the other went a short way ahead to check out a spot they were curious about. That decision would haunt them both. The first boy walked maybe 50 feet farther, barely out of sight, when he suddenly froze. There, in a small clearing ahead, was a figure. It was massive, towering, covered in hair from head to toe. The creature was kneeling as if observing something on the ground, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that it was being watched. In that moment, the boy knew instinctively this was no bear, no person in a costume. It was too fluid, too real. He didn't scream. He didn't speak. He turned and ran. At the same instant, the creature rose to its full height, well over 7 feet tall, and chased after him. The forest erupted into chaos. Branches snapped, feet pounded. The boy tore back toward his injured friend, who had seen his friend running but didn't yet know why. But then, just behind him, the second boy saw it too, charging from the brush with terrifying speed. No explanation was needed. They ran. Neither spoke as they fled, their breaths ragged, hearts slamming in their chests. The forest blurred around them, every shadow now suspect. They didn't stop until they broke free of the trees and reached the safety of the neighborhood edge, not daring to look back. And when they finally did, the creature was gone, no sound, no trace. Nothing but the echo of their own footsteps and the thunder still pounding in their ears. They didn't report it, didn't tell anyone. When the boy's mother asked why they looked pale as ghosts, they brushed it off. What could they say? That they were chased by a monster in the woods? Who would believe them? But the experience was burned into their memory. They never forgot the size of the thing, the way it moved, the uncanny speed for something so large, and the way it vanished like it had melted back into the woods it came from. It never needed to touch them. The fear alone was enough. Encounter 9 submitted by witness on Wednesday, October 8, 2003. A father's ATV ride near Beaver or Lost Bridge Lake in the spring of 1994 led to a sighting he would retell for years. A tall, shadowy Bigfoot crossing the woods at sunset. In the early spring of 1994, the hills and woods surrounding Lost Bridge Lake and Beaver Lake in Benton County, Arkansas, were slowly beginning to wake from winter's grip. The trees stood tall, their bare branches letting in the soft golden light of the evening sun, casting long shadows across the trail-worn hills. It was on one of those quiet evenings that a local man decided to go riding with his friends. The group was out on ATVs, carving paths down the ridgelines and slopes that eventually led to a dirt road running through the forest. There were no houses nearby, no towns within shouting distance, just woods, ridges, and the quiet hum of four-wheelers pushing through the spring dusk. He was at the front of the group that day, riding down the hill ahead of the others. As he reached the bottom and rolled onto the dirt road, he pulled to a stop to wait for his friends to catch up. The sun was low now, filtering sideways through the trees in radiant streaks that lit the forest floor in gold and shadow. And then he saw it, just across the road. On the opposite slope, near the tree line, something moved. The figure was walking upright, tall, fluid, deliberate. The sun was behind it, casting it in silhouette, but there was no mistaking its form. Long arms, enormous strides, and a stature between 7 and 8 feet tall. It crossed between the trees as though it belonged there, like it had always been there. For several seconds the man just watched, paralyzed more by awe than fear. And then, like a ghost fading into shadow, the figure disappeared back into the trees. By the time his friends arrived at the bottom of the hill, the woods looked just as they had a minute before, still and empty. He told them what he saw. Predictably, they didn't believe him. Years passed. The moment never left his memory. His son, curious about cryptids and drawn to stories of the unknown, began asking him about Bigfoot one day during a conversation about ghost stories and strange sightings in Arkansas. At first he hesitated, but then, for the second time in his life, he told the story, nearly identical to the first time he had shared it. Not a word had changed. It had happened. That much he knew. Whether anyone believed him didn't matter anymore. The story was now part of the family, and as fate would have it, his son's biology class at Bentonville High School would delve into cryptozoology. They watched the legend of Boggy Creek together, and the son began connecting the dots. He realized that the sightings his father described weren't isolated. Other reports had surfaced in nearby Decatur. Other figures had been seen, always just on the edge of the woods, always slipping away before being fully understood. The man didn't have every detail. He couldn't remember how many steps it took, or exactly how long the creature was in view. But he remembered how it made him feel. stunned, small, and like he had caught a fleeting glimpse of something that wasn't meant to be seen. And once you've seen it, the forest never looks quite the same again. Whether myth, misunderstood creature, or something far more ancient, the forests of Arkansas still whisper with unanswered questions. If these encounters sent a chill down your spine, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more true tales from the shadows. You never know what story might come next or how close it might hit to home.